In this video, we come to monopolies. And you've probably heard of monopolies before, but they have a lot of complex things behind them. So we're going to have to do several videos on this. All right. First off, to define a monopoly and their market structure is one firm. Okay? And that's what most people know. There's just one business that's bringing this service or good to us. Why is there one firm? Because there are extreme barriers to entry. There's only one firm because that's all the market will bear. There are extreme barriers to entry. And there are no substitutes. So without any substitutes, you have no other choices. You have one firm and they deliver the product. Okay? So that is the market structure of monopolies. Normally, we wouldn't care if it was an elastic product. No one really cares if there's one firm. What really scares us is when it's an inelastic product. So if we take a look here, we're going to see that an inelastic product is what bothers people, because in this case, the demand, you can see how steep that is. All that one firm has to do to charge really high prices is just restrict the supply a little bit and say, hey, well, we just don't have much, and so you're just going to have to pay like 100 times what you paid last year. And what are you going to do? There's no substitute. No one else is going to produce it. Extreme barriers to entry. That's one firm. That's all you got to deal with. So what are you going to do? The problem is it's inelastic. It's a really steep demand curve. And so if it's inelastic, and you remember that from chapter 5, you'll remember that that's where there is a situation where it's a necessity. It's hard to delay purchase, okay? Things like gasoline, that would be inelastic, or like milk, or water if you're dying of thirst, or life-saving medicine, or that kind of thing. So if you have a life-saving medicine, you can't delay purchase, and they want to charge you a lot for it, well, you're going to pay it. And so that's what strikes fear into everyone, okay? There are monopolies out there that are elastic. The thing is, when it's elastic, that demand curve lays down flat. And you remember it's the opposite of this inelastic one. The idea here is that it's easy to delay purchase. Okay? It's not something you need. It's a luxury. And so we say, who cares? So this one doesn't scare us as much as this one over here. So you got to keep in mind, when people are talking about evil monopolies preying on people, they're really just talking about this category here. Think about some kind of monopoly that really doesn't matter. There's probably better ones out there, but I was thinking of the New England Patriots in football. They have just kept winning and winning and winning for years, and we're going to find out, this year, is it because of Tom Brady or is it Bill Belichick? What's the real secret that they've been winning so much? But clearly, they've just been a hugely dominant dynasty, and the Patriots have just won and won and won and won, and the Browns have just lost and lost and lost. There's not much there. And so, is it because the Patriots have locked themselves into a system where only the best players will play for them, and that's why they're monopolizing all the talent? Why doesn't everyone care about this? Why don't we pass a non-Patriots drafting act or something? No one cares because it's an elastic monopoly, if it is a monopoly at all, Okay, they win every year. It's a luxury. It's not going to hurt my life if they win every year. And I'm in no way damaged, okay? Can I go without watching football? Yes, I can. And so it's a luxury. It's easy to delay purchase. And so while a monopoly might occur in some area, if it's elastic, no one really cares. It's only these things that really give people fear and cause us to pass laws against monopolies. So distinguish between the two, because we have a lot of monopolies out there, but only these are the ones that people care about. All right. So why do monopolies form? There are a number of reasons. The first one, and most commonly understood one, is called a natural monopoly. All right? So, a natural monopoly is one that just naturally occurs because that's the nature of the market. It's not that the business firms are like Mr. Burns scheming on how to get rid of everyone. No, it's just that's the way it is. Okay? There's these things. No substitutes, extreme barriers to entry leads to one firm. So, natural monopolies are kind of like the black holes in the physics universe. They are unique oddities that we can't quite figure out. We understand partly why they work the way they do, and we just have to deal with them. All right? A normal business, we're going to take a look here, has some economies of scale. As they get bigger, things get cheaper per unit. Imagine if I wanted to produce my own Mountain Dew. You know, for me to go dig up some bauxite ore and smelt it into an aluminum can and then get some kind of thing that pressurizes, and I got to get the formula right and mix it and put it in there. For me to make one can of Mountain Dew would probably cost like $100,000. Why would I ever do that in my own garage? But if I had a factory and I could purchase the ore with large purchases, then the cost goes down. And so the bigger I get, the cheaper the Mountain Dew is for each can. In fact, where each Mountain Dew can costs about 20 cents to make, and they sell it for about $1, and they pay their workers with a lot of that, and they keep 10 cents for profit, and there you go. Okay? But at some point, I can't just make my factory infinitely big. So at some point, there's too much land, too much space, too many machines to maintain. And the second shift, the third shift, and the night shift is more expensive because people want overtime. And see, for me to make more then starts becoming less and less expensive and more costly. And so there it is. I've got some economies of scale at first as I get bigger, but as I continue to increase, I get less and less out of that. Sounds a lot like diminishing marginal returns, you know? At first it's really good and then it gets bad as it goes down. This curve right here is simply the opposite of diminishing marginal returns. I've just flipped it over. Instead of looking at returns and it goes up and then down, now we're looking at cost. Cost goes down and then up. Okay? So my cost per unit has some economies of scale. The bigger I get, the cheaper it gets at first, but then it takes off like that. Same kind of thing with how many business firms you put out there, like Starbucks. The first one they put out, it's a nice little coffee shop, it makes some money, you know, but what if they put out 10 or 100 or 1,000? Now we've got like name recognition everywhere you go. You can share in the advertising cost between all the firms, so it gets cheaper and cheaper. The problem is, do you want a Starbucks every mile? Well, then it's becoming a little harder to make money. Do you want a Starbucks every block, as it is in Seattle? Do you want a Starbucks inside every business of every storefront? Now, it's really not worth it. You've saturated the market and you've defeated the whole purpose. So, at some point, usually right here is where businesses want to stop. At some point, businesses say, I've expanded as much as I can, and I need to just stop. Because now things are becoming more expensive, and it's not worth it for me to do this. So, diminishing marginal returns, okay? There are a few businesses out there that the bigger they get, the cheaper they get, and it never stops. They have infinite economies of scale as far as we know. As they get bigger, it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and they get bigger, and it gets cheaper, and they get bigger, and it's cheap, and it just goes that way to the point where they gobble up every other competitor, and there's only one left. That's it. All right. Some examples of this are going to be all things that are utilities. Think about water. Okay, which water system do you hook up to? You hook up to the one. Imagine if there were 5 water pipes under your street, and they're all providing clean water. Which one would you hook up to? Well, you'd hook up to the cheapest one. So that cheapest one is the one you'd hook up to, but then no one would hook up to the more expensive one, and then there's, four left, so this one and that one and these two, which one would you hook up to? Because it's both clean water. You'd hook up to the one that's the cheapest, and they're buying up everyone else, and so as they get bigger and bigger, they get cheaper and cheaper, and pretty soon all you got is one. That's it. So for them, they have infinite economies of scale, just like in the physical universe, a black hole has infinite amounts of gravity. It just shrinks out of existence. It never stops crushing down on itself. These businesses never stop getting cheaper per unit as they get bigger. So why do so many towns have just one water company? This is the reason, okay? They're providing a good that not only does not have any substitutes, but it's all identical. If you want clean water and someone else says, I got clean water, like, it's clean water. It's water. And there's no substitute for it. It's clean or it's not, okay? And no one's really going to hook up to this slightly dirty water. No, they're not going to do that. Think again about utilities like electricity. Okay? Electricity has no substitute, and it is identical. So which power company are you going to hook up to? Well, you're going to hook up to the one that's the cheapest, and then all the others are going to have no customers. And so how many do you have? You have one. So they will get bigger and bigger and cheaper, and no one can come in and compete with them because extreme barriers to entry. They would have to build an entire network of electricity for an entire city, and it would have to be cheaper than the original one right from the get-go. Otherwise, no one would switch. So, utilities, for your notes there, are always monopolies because of infinite economies of scale. The bigger they get, the cheaper the kilowatts get per unit. The bigger the water system gets, the cheaper the water units get per unit. They just never stop, okay? So they not only can saturate the market, they can own the entire city and be one water system, and that's fine. And every time they add another house, they just get cheaper per unit. It just keeps going down, okay? So water, power, sewer service, all of those things are utilities. Now you want to think about this though, because garbage, we think, is that a utility? Garbage is actually not a utility. And unfortunately, a lot of people lump it in here. Most cities do not actually take care of their own garbage. If they do, they are usually very inefficient. All right? Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich von Hayek, the Austrian school has proved this over and over. Governments are very inefficient at the things they do. And so because of that, they always argued that we should put things into the market as much as possible. And in fact, most cities find that this is the case. So Allied Garbage Services and Waste Management is not run by the Dows. It's a private company that the Dows contracts with to remove garbage. There are substitutes, okay? We have a county dump up on the hill. You can take your garbage there, or you can take your garbage to the transfer station run by Allied. Which one do you want? See, you can shop around. There are substitutes. There are no extreme barriers to entry. So should we have only one firm do garbage? Actually, no. So this is why this unit is so important, because understanding monopolies really understands the interface between when we should have market forces working and when we should have government forces working. And we're going to get into that more later with some other things and externalities, but you need to understand these differences. Is it inelastic product, life-saving medication, or is it an elastic product, the NFL? Right? So garbage services, water. One of those is a natural monopoly. The garbage service is actually monopolistic competition. That's a free market. And different companies can come in and outbid the other ones with a lower bid and do garbage services. All right? So keep that in mind. Utilities, Some matter and some don't. For example, cable. Some people would argue that cable is a utility. Well, let's think about that. Is cable a necessity? Is it inelastic? I don't have cable. It is elastic. I can live my whole life without cable TV and I will be just fine. In fact, I might be better. Okay? So, it's an elastic product. Are there any substitutes for cable TV? The internet, direct TV, dish TV. We have substitutes. There's no high barriers to entry. You can switch from cable to direct TV anytime you want. You just call them up and cancel one and get the other. Cable is not a utility. All right? Monopolistic competition. The airlines were thought for a long time to be a utility. There was certain, like, a guaranteed amount of service that you had to have. And I can remember growing up, you know, they required airlines to fly to certain cities because everyone had to have that service. And then people realized, wait, forcing United Airlines and American Airlines to send people to Salem, Oregon, that's where I lived. I would go watch the planes land, and as a little kid, that was all fun, you know, and you'd see 7 people get off a plane. Like, well, what was that about? All right. So they deregulated this industry. They said, hey, it's just, let's let the market do it and see what happens. I think that was 1978, 1979, moving into the 80s, and suddenly, boom, an explosion of different types of services occurred. Because the airline industry is not a monopolistic or oligopolistic type of industry. The government was actually keeping it that way. Once they got out of the way, then what happened is all these different types of services came online. You remember, monopolistic competition is all about differentiation. We're different than you. So suddenly there was luxury flights where you had 3 meals crossing the Atlantic, you know, and you had these reclining seats, first class, and all this kind of stuff. Could be champagne brought to you. And you had the economy fares, they call them. It was like Southwest Airlines, I think JetBlue really did these because you're just going from one city to the next. You get a package of peanuts if you want, and it's $69, and you're crammed in like sardines, but hey, it's only for an hour. So if you want a really cheap flight, you can do that. If you want a more luxurious flight, you can pay for that. You can pay for anything in between. Do you want to leave in the middle of the night? Do you want to fly a little tiny plane to Salem, Oregon, and the big plane goes to Portland? I mean, there was all these different options, okay? So when you get the market structures wrong, you pass some pretty bad laws that can restrict things, that can cause dislocations again. So you want to understand the nature of these industries so that you can get them right. Cable TV and airlines, they're not utilities. They had many, many choices, and that's the idea there. Also, they're elastic products. Shouldn't have even been there in the first place. So now we bring us to the tough one. Medical services. This is a convoluted topic, all right? Medical services, are they like this? Do they have infinite economies of scale? Or are they like this? It's my opinion that they are this over here. Okay? So one local doctor spends a lot of time doing things that's a very high cost. But if you can set up a medical facility with at least one x-ray room, one MRI room, you know, one radiation cancer treatment center, you get some pretty cheap things coming down here. But after that, it starts to go up as you get bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you saturate the market with hospital stuff, then it becomes overly expensive. They're not doing enough patients. So that's a problem. Now, what we've done as our society is we've said any patient that waits too long, it's not worth it to let them wait, and so we'll just spend tremendous amounts of money. I think the United States spends something like 2 or 3 times the average industrialized nation expenditures on healthcare, and we don't really get a good return for it. And so what's happened is it's not actually a market force system, because the medical field is extremely governmental controlled, And so what we end up with is, to make sure everyone gets whatever they want, we heavily subsidize with extra money to make sure that happens. We could make this a lot cheaper, but what we've tried to do is mesh the market with government. And so by putting those two together, we thought we'll get the best of both worlds. What we ended up with is the worst of both worlds. Okay? So we have crony capitalism running government panels, and together they have conspired to push the price of healthcare to tremendous levels, with the service being left at a rather mediocre rate. Okay? If you don't believe me on the stats, you should look it up. I highly encourage it. How much does America spend on healthcare per other countries? What kind of medical rates of success do we have compared to other countries? You might be surprised. Okay? We're really not getting a return on it. What's the problem with medical services? In my opinion, they are not privately owned. What if we had 2 hospitals in the Dalles? What if we had 3? It is an inelastic product. I definitely want good medical services, but there's no substitutes. What do? Drive to Hood River? White salmon? I know people that do that. They will drive for hours just to get good medical coverage. So there's some extreme barriers to entry. What's preventing another hospital from coming in? See, that's when a group in the pharmaceutical and hospital industry gets together with the government and says, let's pass a law that keeps everyone out of our industry. Hey, look, now we can raise prices. Okay? So it would be really cool if I could have multiple choices, and it would be even cooler if I could invest in them. Could I own stock in different medical companies? Yeah, some of the pharmacy ones, but could I own stock in a hospital? Okay? So the stockholders would then be like, we got to do this right, we got to do this good, we got to do this well, and we got to do it for the cheapest cost, and we got to give the most value. That's the market forces driving it. Okay? So that's one of the things to think about here. So the argument goes back and forth in medical services. Do we have too much business in there? So if we take that out, we go all government. Do we have too much government? So we take that out and let the businesses go. But if they do that, then they'll raise the price way up because there's only one. I think it's a lot like the airline industry. We're afraid of what we currently have, thinking it will go forward forever. When, as they deregulated the airlines, people could shop around. Okay? There's another big monopoly that has the same problem. We're going to get to that at the end. It's a geographical monopoly. We'll see if you can guess. But there's a very big institution that is run geographically as a monopoly, and we could free that one up too. Okay? So, hopefully this generates some questions for you in class, gives you some ideas and directions of thought that you can go with on these, and we'll see you on the next one.